I can kick us off.
Good.
So just to remind everybody, we started this forum type during the storms where you don't need a speaker card. This is really meant to be interactive. Mayor is the facilitator, but be kind to each other, and we're here to answer questions. And Brandon's got a brief presentation because one of the things I think we probably tripped up on the beach ordinance is when things don't go smooth, I always go back and look at the process. And so Brandon's done a lot of work on trying to help us figure out how to move forward expeditiously, but also a process that we can get buy-in early on. So tonight, we're gonna talk about process. Want to get your feedback, see if we're missing anything or missing any steps. We've kind of landed here based on all the feedback we've received over the last just few months I've been here. And so with that, kicking off, and then definitely gonna take notes and questions. And if you missed tonight, I've heard some community members were confused about the noticing. This isn't noticed normal because it's just a community meeting. So we're not gonna vote. We don't make any decisions. And in fact, well, now we have quorum. I was about to say we didn't have quorum, but we do. But technically, we don't have to have quorum because again, this is just a more casual setting. So with that, Brandon, all you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Brandon Berry. I'm a planner with the city. I'll keep this brief. We're really here to hear from you, the public, but we wanted to put forward the staff proposal for this ordinance. This is something that started back in 2022 with the city. It's been through a few different iterations, different staff, and we received significant feedback on the beach ordinance earlier this year. We had a few public hearings, and we're bringing it back as what we're proposing to be 3 separate ordinances, so that we can move them forward expeditiously. We can continue to get public feedback and address those issues that are priorities for the city, about moving forward and having discussions on some of the other items. So I'll cover the 3 ordinances as they're being proposed. The first is behavioral conduct and permitting related requirements. These are priorities that were in the ordinance back in 2022. They have not received substantial comment up to this point at recent meetings. These are things such as stronger regulations for removing abandoned equipment and furniture on the public beaches, requiring permits for those transient, non-site-based businesses. So those are pop-ups on the public beach, typically photography setups, situations like exercise classes where the city wants to be aware of these activities going on, but they're not necessarily related to the commercial beachfront. And then prohibitions on smoking, leaving unattended fishing lines, and unpermitted e-bikes. These were other items that have been in the ordinance since early on. They have not received substantial comment. They didn't receive any major pushback in the meetings we had earlier this year. So these are items that we feel can move forward relatively quickly. One recommendation that had been made by the Beach Stewardship Committee was that we do a more thorough underline and strike through what is actually being changed as it's currently set up, and what's been presented up to this point is a large scale strike through and then readoption of our code. But in a lot of cases, it's really just a change of a few sections in moving it into this new chapter. So we want it to be apparent what is actually being changed when this ordinance is moved forward. We're proposing a timeline of moving this forward to the Beach Stewardship Committee at their August meeting. That'll be on August 20th. And from there, it'll move on to the first and second reading should it receive positive feedback from the committee. One of the items we promised to move forward, and with this reevaluation, we're going to handle in tandem with the other ordinances, is looking at our wildlife-friendly lighting. It's currently in our land development code as marine turtle lighting. We've discussed our current ordinance with our local and state partners, the Sea Turtle Conservancy, which is supported by the Fish and Wildlife Commission at the state level over the last month. And our ordinance is in a pretty good place. It has a pretty good framework as it stands. We were evaluated back in 2022 to have a somewhat ideal ordinance. We scored fairly well for language and for implementation. We actually do quite a bit more now than we did back in 22. As it comes to code enforcement, we do social media posts, we do other things that the state likes to show that we are supporting our marine turtle ordinance. However, our current ordinance is 18 years old. It's based on a 32-year-old state model lighting ordinance, and there has been updates, technical standards that have been introduced in those 32 years. Many of the updates that we need, the framework is good, but we need technical updates to support that framework. That's focusing on long wavelength light bulbs. We have a bevy of different options in our code, but they don't necessarily support what science now shows helps the turtles. So focusing on introducing those long wavelength standards for bulbs. There's a recent study, and it's actually not updated at the state level yet either, showing that visible light transmittance, if you were involved with any of the public hearings for the recent developments, 45% is the standard that's currently in the state model ordinance. It's what staff supported at the time. There's actually a study that came out just earlier this year showing that 30% is what municipalities should be focusing for, having that 70% tint occlusion. So that's something we would be looking at amending in for development moving forward. Mandating spectrometric test for new lighting that is not on the state's model lighting category. Adding standards for pool and requiring full cutoff fixtures and shields on exterior lights. This is something that, again, we've received substantial feedback from the state on. It is something that we feel that we can update and move forward relatively quickly. So we're going to be looking at taking this to the Beach Stewardship Committee this August in tandem with the first ordinance that was presented. And the bulk of our comments at the meetings earlier this year had to do with cabana service areas, alcohol, commercial beach furniture. These are items that to some extent fall in line with some state laws that were recently passed this session as well. So these are items that address and modify existing regulations related to location, operation, and service on recognized commercially operated beach areas. Again, we've received substantial feedback on these, and this is something we want to take forward as a more holistic evaluation. We've received a lot of different comments on various parts of the current consolidated beach ordinance. And this is something we're proposing to take forward as its own separate ordinance versus discussion and in a modified format. So that is this proposal. Staff currently has it. We're excited to hear from you and get your feedback. Thank you.
I have a question. Does anybody receive the agenda prior to the meeting?
This is not a notice, it's not a.
Okay,
This is just.
okay, just, well, the presentation. Did anybody receive the presentation prior to the meeting?
I'm seeing it for the first time too. I think if your comment is, and I agree with you, it's helpful to get it in advance.
In advance. Well, I heard it did go out in advance.
I give a copy. Yeah.
Someone requested a copy, I think, and then we.
Well, I would have requested a copy as well, so didn't know that was available.
We can make a note that sometimes we don't have the presentations available. So it's just out the feedback.
Well, I would assume that if it went out to a developer, it should probably go out to the commission as well.
I think it's sort of an easy one. I know that in one of the drafts, there was discussion about sleeping on the beach. And I think that that's intended for people probably sleeping at the beach at night when they should be sleeping somewhere else. People also sleep on the beach a lot during the day. I just think that that should be worded in a way that we don't create a uniquely problematic situation.
You don't have to read it.
I don't know that that would be enforced that way, but you know, before we put it in paper.
We'll bring something, I think it fits into behavioral, which is tents on the beach. I've been walking on the beach many times where tent gets blown over, knocks into people. People are dragging big tents around, they turn around, they whack people with them. It sounds like it'd be prudent to have no tents without a permit from the city. I just think that's something that's a safety concern and also like this, the hearing complaints from people on the beach of tents.
We already have a provision there for tents. There is, and that is that you cannot have a tent exceeding 10 by 10, nor can you have multiple put together. I don't know that you can prohibit tents or structures all together.
That might be big.
That's a medium sized tent. That's what you use, a tailgate party, you can barely fit 3 people on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that 10 by 10 is too big, or I didn't know it should have any tents, because I think when 4th of July weekend, you know, for example, I saw a tent fly up, just whack into people who are unsuspecting, as they should be, right next to them. And I think it's too hard to say, well, they have to be anchored down, and you check to make sure they're anchored, and I've heard people complain about this, residents, hotel guests, a lot of people, so, I would say, you know, chairs, blankets, whatever, you know, someone wants to have an umbrella, those are normal beach things, but tents I don't think are really, appropriate.
I think umbrellas are just as dangerous.
Yeah.
They're even more of a impalement danger.
So what size tents are you talking about? You're talking about the small baby tents where people use for babies, right? Like those little shelters, are you talking?
No, I'm
about
talking on poles high up.
What size? Where's the cutoff? What type of tent is no longer good? Which size tent is?
I mean, a baby tent, I think we all agree is fine, right? It's a small little tent for kids, that makes sense, but there's something on poles that's up high, I think that's the problem. I think that's the stuff that gets caught by the
So an
wind.
umbrella that's on a pole,
What's that?
an umbrella that's on a pole.
I think that the umbrella is not a big thing, to get back to your point of 10 by 10. So, you know, I think we've got to figure out what makes sense, what's not dangerous, what's, you know, not whacking into people, not flying off and hitting people.
We have a lot of reports of people getting hit on the beach by tents.
I mean, if you look at the reports I see, no.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it, saw it a couple days ago. So,
Are you reporting it or what's the?
no, I mean, no one was bleeding,
Okay.
so, but, you know, and it wasn't my guess, right? So I can't control it. It's not, you know, I don't want to anger people by saying, you know, wow, that seems like that hurt, and you probably shouldn't have that size of tent on the beach. It's not under the code right now. It's not my place to do that.
Do we have something in the code that's saying it needs to be secure? Maybe just make it secure.
And I think there's a difference between trying to fix stupid and trying to fix the real problem, right? So if you have a 10 to 20-mile-an-hour winds, that's really not, you know, so at what point, how far do we take this, right? How far do we try to, you know, control behavior, right? And where's it cut off? Right, because there's a lot of things that's just, it's a bad idea if you're just not smart enough. You know, if you put, and I've seen people put up tents in 20-mile-an-hour winds where I'm getting sandblasted. That's a bad idea. Anyone that's for the nose.
If there's one thing I agree with what you said is how far we control behavior. Maybe that comes back in other conversations, but look, I just, from my perspective, and I noticed from other hotels around, these tents have been a problem blowing around. People are dragging them on the beach, dragging them through properties. They whack into things, they whack into people as they're dragging them on the beach. It's just, you know, and quite honestly, there's been tents that are bigger than 10 by 10. I actually didn't know they're 10 by 10. But now that you mention it, it's like, oof, God, we got a tape measure and start measuring people's tents. You know, how do you distinguish what's the right size, the wrong size? Isn't it easier to say, hey, you know, you wanna bring something, that umbrella is small, it's a one pole device, it's not gonna be huge. Great, you wanna bring a beach chair, you wanna bring a towel, fine, but the tents just historically have been an issue where people, at least to us, complain.
How would you enforce this? How would this be enforced?
Law enforcement, not by.
The size of the tents or any of it? You have an umbrella over here, that's one pole, and you have a 10 by 10 tent here, and you telling these people they can't have shade, and this, you need to bring an umbrella versus why, it sounds like the reason is because of safety, correct? And I think umbrellas are more of an issue that you see them blowing down the beach. You know, a storm moves in
With a
pretty
spike at the
quickly.
With
Yeah,
a spike at the end.
yeah, and So how far do we go, it's like if it gets windy and a storm's coming, the tent should probably come down. But there's more, I think, of a danger with an umbrella. If it's the wind and blowing into other people, than a 10 by 10 tent, that's a frame, because that's heavier. So. The only thing that I've seen on the beach is.
Down an umbrella and it's a tent, right?
Right, the higher winds with the tents, or with the 10 by 10 framed tents, or even whatever size, is, people do, once the storms come rolling in, try to get them down, and they literally will get mangled, and they just leave them. So, there's that side of it too, but as far as a safety concern, and again, how are we gonna say you can't bring this, but you can bring that, and here's a list? I would say that's a challenge. And if I'm coming to the beach and I have 4 or 5 people, a little umbrella is not gonna do it. So I have 5 little umbrellas, and now that's even more of an issue. I don't know.
There was another town, just another island just north of us went down this path. And the feedback after the fact was intense, and I think they reversed it. So we could learn from our northern island neighbors that not allowing shade on a tent is a bad thing. And then the second thing I had, wasn't it just a week ago that there was somebody in the news in Florida that got impaled by an umbrella? That same thing, it blew up and went through that. So I agree, tents or tents, anything in high wind, Mary, you said. What word did you want to say?
Well, I mean, I want to let people look common sense, right?
Common sense.
Yeah, but I'm saying you can't fix. I mean, if you don't have any common sense, I really can't help you there. But, some of this stuff is just common sense, right?
I think, I mean, I remember that when making the news, and there may even have been, back and forth, with some of the residents. I think it was Reddington, but I'm not.
Yeah, it was a couple, I couldn't remember if it was Treasurer Reddington or Reddington.
Yeah.
Someone else has addressed this, and then I thought reversed it.
I think Myrtle Beach too may have done the same thing. It was not successful. Okay.
Brandon, I have a question for you about the activities that will require permits on the beach. And if there is, if we're going to try to define where the line is between commerce that's happening on the beach or people who are using public beach access for beach activities.
I think so. That's something we're gonna have to work through with the Beach Stewardship Committee. The commission as we move that forward. We don't currently have that definition. We just make a reference to it. But I think defining it's important. So.
Okay, thanks.
Brandon, I have a question on the sea turtle. You mentioned studies. Is the city planning on doing a study or using something that's already published?
No, the state published a study they supported the study that was published a few months ago showing that 30% BLT is really what communities should be aiming for. That's what makes it statistically significantly different. So that would be a standard for new development moving forward. We'd be looking at introducing.
And was it just focused on the transmittance, or is there other things like, is it, maybe I'll just ask for the study via email, but
It's inside to outside. I'll send it.
there's more to it than that. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Is there a practical example? We can see what that looks like somewhere, Brandon.
Regional Conservancy may have that. This day. Supported that study as well. And I think they may have a visual of what that looks like on their website.
Yeah, I think there's images in the study. I'll see what's
Yeah.
available.
I would say the placeholder on that is just to make sure that, look, I think we're all for sea turtle conservation, and I think we do a lot, but if it's just so dark that a resident or guest can't really see well outside, like, I don't know, I heard 70%, I just don't know what it means, but we'll look into it. But I was put the placeholder on that if it's so dark that someone bought a unit as a resident and bought it from the view and can't really see the view from inside, and especially if they don't have a balcony in their unit and that's the only exposure they have to be outside, I can see them being fairly unhappy about that situation.
Brandon, is the current sea turtle filter tool that you guys use currently, is that 45%?
We've reached out for the product specs, but we don't know exactly what those are. That's what we use, and it seems to work pretty well. At least it catches most of the ones that we feel are in violation, but I don't have an exact percentage.
I think that might be, those filters might be tied more to the wavelength than the percent that goes through too, right? I think it's supposed to block certain wavelengths and let certain wavelengths through. Because if you, think about it, you have a much brighter light on one side. You know, if you're starting with a brighter light, regardless what the tint is, more is going to go through. And yeah, I think that wavelength is a really big deal for that. But that's all covered in the ordinance already, right? The wavelength.
So we don't currently specify a wavelength. That's part of the state's model lighting ordinance. The 560 nanometers, the preference for anything above that's consistent with what the state currently has adopted in their model.
You think you're going to try and match that?
I believe so. That's cool.
The current for the, any of the considered lighting standards, are they for any light that's visible from the beach or just the properties that are on the west side of the farm?
Anything visible from the
Anything
beach.
visible.
There's 3 criteria. So it's not just the wavelength. It has to be either low, long wavelength, and or shielded. So if it's up high and it's the right wavelength, it should still be shielded so that the light is directed down. So those are the 3 criteria set forth by FWC and Sea Turtle Conservancy. And I'm not sure that, are all of those 3 in the model ordinance?
They are.
I think so, yes. I don't think the state and beach ordinance has all 3.
We don't currently have full cutoff, which is something that the state recommended we add in that provides the shielding. So.
If anybody's interested, they can see if our condo Sea Turtle Conservancy actually gave us a grant and we have our building certified. And I can show you pictures, you can actually see, that's a non-compliant fixture through the filter. They sent us one fixture that was not correct. That's a compliant. And this was taken during the day with the lights on. So you can see, you can't see the light bulbs.
And your building has that tint right now on the windows?
This isn't windows. This is the
Oh,
bulbs.
I thought you were
through.
saying you did windows also, sorry.
We also have turtle, in our windows, we have turtle glass.
What,
And then,
just so I
and
can-
here's a face down with 2 light bulbs that are on during the day. You can't see the light bulbs. Because it's compliant.
What building, if you don't mind, just so I can go see what it looks like?
113 Cabrillo.
Thank you. The other thing, Brandon, I heard you mention was, things like photo sessions, I didn't understand exactly what the intent was regarding like some of these activities on the beach, like photo sessions.
So again, that's working through with the beach stewardship committee indication of what is defined as a commercial activity on the public beach. We do have this type of pop-up transient businesses, and from what I've heard from the beach stewardship committee as well as others speaking in public meetings, is that we just want to have some kind of regulations related to those businesses on the public beach, knowing that they're operating, and so on.
Okay.
Similar to like the wedding stuff.
Correct.
Yeah, currently, like if you go to Upland Beach on a weekend at sunrise or sunset, you're apt to run across professional photo shoots of the level where they have 3 photographers, 1 person dedicated to lights, 1 person holding the reflectors, a little dressing room set up on the beach so the models can change in and out of bikinis while they're doing their photo shoot. Like some of them are a big production.
Gotcha. So it's not that it would be prohibited, it's just that having some parameters on what hours are doing this, like whether they're bringing big sets with them, and lugging things on the beach and things like that.
And are you thinking that's per case or you have a permit just to do that type of business?
I think it's typically for the entity. We have special event permitting for beach events, obviously, but this would be for the entities that are, repeatedly operating.
Is that currently listed out in the ordinance as far as a business operating, or can we be more specific?
So, and that's something we'll work through, but we currently prohibit any kind of solicitation on public beach, and we run into this issue before where if there isn't direct solicitation, but there's still a commercial operation on the beach, that's something that the ordinance doesn't currently cover. And that's the feedback we've received, that we need to know that these entities are operating, and, again, if they're extravagant or, setups, just making sure that they're breaking down, they're not introducing lights that would be adverse to the turtles and so on.
It's hard because I know that I have several friends that's just them and they're photographers, and they'll go out and they may just go out and take a photo, just a photo shoot of 1 person. So,
I think that's trying to find that line between what is somebody who is, maybe it is a business, but they're just using a public place
right,
for what they're doing versus something that's a bigger thing that's, like I've also seen like a very elaborate proposal set up with an arch and a red carpet and
right.
lights and candles and, and I think that's what's gonna be the challenge is defining those things and figuring out where to draw the line. I think that's something that the beach stewardship committee is gonna have to really, and staff are gonna have to really think about.
The other thing, and we talked about this, when we were doing the Beach Ambassador program, is helping to educate and create awareness. And, if there are 10 businesses out there, especially at Upham, because that's very happening, it does happen, at what point, do we know if they have a permit? If they don't have a permit, who tells them that they should have a permit? And, can they get a permit after the fact? And if it, how is all that going to work? Because, nobody's been able to answer those questions because it's difficult. So.
I think it's a good point. It's like, how do you enforce this, right? Do you have police officer or sheriff walking on the beach, trying to figure out who's just doing a private shoot versus a professional shoot versus, and you don't want to put officers in a position of having to like question everyone, offending people who are just taking pictures of their grandkids and, I don't know. I similar to the mayor's comment, I feel like sometimes the more you go to Big Brother, the worse it ends up being for everyone. And then the people who suffer are, the sheriff department's getting in conflict with a lot of people, which isn't fair to them. And it's not fair to the residents or whoever just doing their thing. So I mean, maybe it's more about what kind of equipment you can have on the beach without a permit versus doing photo shoots, because I think if you start to get into the photo shoot, then, there's just gonna be some people with some really fancy cameras taking pictures of their family. And, how do they argue that they're not professional to an officer?
I think the issue is there has to be a level of enforcement, I think, on the beach. So what does that look like? And who's gonna be doing that? And if they are out there, like the people that are setting up the cabanas and they have a cooler with champagne, and, a whole hoopla, and tiki torches and all kinds of stuff, who is it that's gonna educate them and just say, well, first of all, we talked about having the city, have on the website that they have to have the permit physically on them, and they do have to present it if asked. Who's gonna do that? And the only way that works is if they're actually getting a permit. So if they don't have a permit, how do we get them to know that they need a permit? And so I don't know, I don't have the answers, but there's a lot of questions.
You can simplify it by simply delineating commercial activity. And then just add it to the sign that says no commercial activity without a permit.
Yeah, and the enforcement just becomes, it's just like speeding, right? I mean, not everyone that speeds gets caught. You hope that the
Well, that's
fast
what's
offenders
happening
do,
now.
right, yeah. And then, if you start to have a problem, then you ask the sheriff to sort of beef up enforcement and things settle, and then maybe you can relax.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, Kevin, but what I'm hearing from everyone is it's not commercial versus private. It's the equipment on the beach that's the issue. Because you could have a family reunion with 40 people and a cousin who does photography standing on a ladder and, a big set, and no one's getting paid for anything, and that's not commercial. I think what I understand you're trying to get at is, the equipment used in a photo shoot as opposed to personal or commercial. Commercial could be one photographer with one person, no props, taking pictures on the beach and getting paid for it.
No, the issue is, just like with the boat ramp and the other city resources that are publicly owned, is that it's being used for commercial activity. And just like we did with the boat ramp, we're implementing a permitting system, so that if you want to use the boat ramp for commercial activity, it's the same thing with the beach. If you're going to monetize the beach, whether it's a yoga class, whether it's your professional video shoot, photo shoot, whether it's whatever else it is, it should require a permit, because you're now in public land. And so it's free to use for everyone, unless you're doing commercial activity. And then you just gotta notify somebody and get the permit.
Yeah, on public property.
I mean, we're talking about 3 places, right?
Yeah.
So we're not. So just like the cabana people and the county park and the bloom have to have a permit, and a license to operate those cabanas. Same thing, anything else that's a commercial activity.
Brandon, I just don't know this, the pool standards for the turtles, is that related to lighting, or is that related to some sort of? Is it something different, like the turtles out, I know we want them to go the other direction. Is it a lighting issue?
It's primarily lighting.
Okay.
A lot of the issues that come up with not necessarily pools, but landscape features, especially facing the beach, is that uplighting, as was mentioned before, isn't necessarily turtle compliant, even if it's a long wavelength bulb, either needs to be full cut off, needs to be oriented in a certain way. It's the same thing with pools, digital lighting source on the wall, to the extent that it needs full curves and thick curves.
By the way, the term full cutoff means what exactly?
It's a limitation on just the overall arc of the light and, the shield that's placed on it.
It has to be a shielded light that goes down or up as opposed to.
Correct, right? It can go up or slow, right?
Yes, just because I mean, I have probably as well as parents, a little history of being on the beach stewardship committee and how long it's taken to get to where we are. And I appreciate obviously all the feedback and just a suggestion, if there's a way that maybe on the website, we could have a way to acquire more feedback from the community with the presentation uploaded and possibly that strike through that we're, even though it's lengthy, I'm sure, but the strike through of the beach ordinance, which kind of shows you the historical why we got to where we are and have been kind of on a standstill for many years. But there's a lot of things that, you know, like we're adding some stuff like the shelters, for example, the 10 by 10, the purpose and reason that we started talking about 10 by 10 was not so much about safety, it was about view. And that's why we started talking about it. And I don't know if Commissioner Mary, you remember this, but was when we were talking about setbacks and where these 10 by 10s were going to be situated and people not, you know, then the conversation was, well, you got a 10 by 10 and then another 10 by 10 that kind of joins. And then now you've got 4 10 by 10s all together. And then that's causing that block in public and private areas because the issue was in Passive Grill, where a lot of times people have birthday parties and then they have like 4 10 by 10s all together, saving or reserving that space. That conversation came up because of the, you know, we call them cabanas, but the chairs, you know, and the placement of the chairs, but people are putting their 10 by 10s and that's really where that started, not so much whether the umbrellas are a pole. And I mean, that's what we were talking about. Obviously there are safety issues, but when you've got a wind that blows, all of a sudden anything can fly and, you know, accidents are accidents, but you know, obviously we don't want accidents to happen, but you can't prevent all accidents. But that was the intention when we started talking about that was placements. And then about the commercial businesses, I agree, it's hard to define, but the problems was not just public property, it was also on private properties. And think of like the Secret Garden area, and many other private properties that own Green High Water Line, that outside entrepreneur commercial entities were having businesses besides the cabana rentals. We have companies like that do birthday setups, right? You can get a whole, and this happens on Upham, I don't know if you've seen it, but like the repelling walls, you know, like they'll set it up for you. And they'll just come set up for a birthday party for children and have a full-fledged, you know, mini adventure obstacle course for party goers. And then for the private property owners, you know, that we've had other private, whether it's picnic setups or photography or whatever it may be, and not being able to identify where they authorize. So, you know, we're not going to tell the city how to do it or how to get there, but there are ways for people to have, whether it's a permitting sticker or something that someone can visually identify, is that commercial entity authorized to have that business at that time in that location, you know, something so people know, so it doesn't become difficult for law enforcement and so forth to identify when people are out there. And these are just things that I remember we were talking about back then when we started talking about these items on beach stewardship. So how do you identify who's compliant or not? And I would say even for buildings who are turtle compliant or not, you know, because I think that's an issue sometimes when people look at a building and they're not understanding whether it's compliant or not. Can there be an identifiable, like, little sign or something like it? Whether it's a hotel or an apartment condominium, you know, that says this building is turtle friendly compliant. You know, because we get the calls, we all know that people say, oh, there's a light on such and such. And then when our code enforcement goes out there, like, no, it's compliant. You know, so something to help educate, right, people so they understand what's good, what's not. Entrances to public areas where people can see a sign that says if you're, you know, bringing up a commercial business, or we've defined it, have you contacted the city and obtain a permit, you know, so something to help the process, right? Because if not, we'll keep going in circles talking about the same thing instead of trying to figure out how we can come up with those solutions to help and make it easier to enforce and identify. So we're not constantly getting the calls of this is a problem, they shouldn't be doing that. No, they can, yes, they can, you know, so something to help in that process. Thank you.
I brought this up before to the beach stewardship, board. When I've been out making doing for that scale. I have seen several terrible encounters involving bicycles. And I think it's very dangerous. One time there was a little toddler at the edge of the water, and I physically jumped in between the toddler and the bike that was charging down the beach. Because they ride on the hard sand. That's the water's edge. And that's where these little kids are playing. And I brought pictures to the stewardship committee where a black skimmer had been run over by a bicycle because they're camouflaged. They can't fly. Their instinct is to hunker down and hide. If they get startled, they don't run away. They don't get out of your way, and they get killed. I just think that bicycles are dangerous on the beach, and I've seen a number of instances that make me feel very strongly about that.
The other thing is a initiative that Treasure Island took that was very effective, and it was the Leave No Trace initiative. And one of the things that we did when I patrolled the beaches there, I would ride with the Public Works guy, Wayne, and we would drive, and I even did it here out on St. Pete Beach, where we would tag if we would get up in the morning, especially after holidays, because long holidays, people bring their tents, their 10 by 10 tents, and they line them up and they leave them. They literally leave everything on the beach, their blankets, their chairs, everything, coolers, you name it, it's left on the beach. And they actually, they're creating a wall. And so we had tags made up, and we would, as we would patrol, if they were still there at 30 minutes before sunrise, we would tag them, and Public Works would come and remove them. And it was a Leave No Trace ordinance, where if it's still out there by 7:30 in the morning, it gets removed. And let me tell you, in Treasure Island, once things started getting removed and people would come out thinking they'd come to their setup, the word got out. So it was effective, essentially. The tags actually will indicate the ordinance number and the little rule in the ordinance.
And where would you put that?
So we use little non-environmentally friendly.
Leave a sticker that says.
It was a little zip tie, and the tag, it was a paper tag with a hole, and we would, a lot of it was the 10 by 10 tents, and we would just put them on there.
Sorry, night or?
In the morning, if they were out there when we were patrolling, first thing in the morning, which meant they were left out overnight.
Yeah.
But that's a problem in itself. They really shouldn't be there overnight.
Right,
And I know we've had a lot of discussions about how many chairs are left out overnight.
but there's nobody out there in the evening that does an evening patrol. So we offered,
Right.
we'll help in this effort and hopefully instill the Leave No Trace initiative.
Is anything being done to enforce that no dogs allowed on the beach? Because there are more and more dogs on the beach. I used to think the dog beach was a good idea. But I think a lot of people just think that St. Pete Beach where dogs are allowed.
The sheriff does enforce that for us, so the challenge they're having is if people just say they're therapy dogs or support animals, and the laws protect them. So if we're gonna, the place to go would be to change the state law, because you can't basically the sheriff cannot enforce if someone verbally states that the dog is a support
Or they
animal.
have to prove it.
No,
That's why there are dogs in grocery stores.
yeah,
And you can't ask them why.
Yes, because that's it.
What the disability is or what the.
No, I understand that, but I mean, if you get in your car, you stop at a cop, you gotta show them your license. Right? You don't have to prove the dog.
Well, there's a difference between service dogs or service animals, right? And other types of medical animals, right? The one class is protected. So they technically can ask 2 questions that they're allowed to ask. If we're gonna go to the heart of it is, maybe the sheriff doesn't necessarily want to spend the resources and energy to go through the trouble. Because there is more that we could do. But if we're gonna be having honest conversation, there's more that we could do. And so this is a conversation that city manager and I've been having with the sheriff. I've been having with him for 3 years. City manager has been having them with him for a year now. We're not making any progress. But that's, I'm giving you the straight answer, not the, so. And so if those of you who live in the condos on the beach, best thing I can tell you is start calling the sheriff's number and say, what's going on? Because there is, if it's a service animal, right, they can ask 2 questions to determine whether it is a service animal, in which case that animal is allowed.
Still has to be on a leash, right? Regardless.
So it still has to be on the leash. Yes.
Yes.
The other issue is, the sheriff has again, I've told him this many times, I appreciate it. On a personal perspective, that the 2 strikes versus the 1 strike. But as you mentioned, you start giving out tickets on the first strike, people will start learning. And the behavior will change. And so currently it's just a matter of enforcement. It's not a matter of not having things on the books. We have the ordinances on the books. It's more of how do we enforce the sheriff to enforce?
Are code enforcement enforced? Things like
Yes, sir.
Your next conversation with the sheriff, my favorite one, I actually live in a condo on the beach. They were going down with their their gator or whatever like that, past the dog, kept going, and then the dog was chasing. The gator. I saw him. I can't make it. And then kept on going, and then the dog came back and nothing happened.
Yeah.
Then the same dog was in the dunes doing all sorts of things, running, so. Can't make
So,
that.
I would get your residents to call the non-emergency number for the sheriff and say, when are you gonna start enforcing? Because we can put pressure on them, but if 8,000 people call, maybe we'll get some results.
It is enforcement because just over the past ride, Shell Island, and then over the next past Port Soda, and then certainly Egmont Key, it's very heavily enforced. And you will get, big tickets for having.
That's state.
No, of course.
They have a different philosophy.
No, of course, that's my point though, that
Yeah.
I think that it's an enforcement.
No, it's an administrative issue. It's not do we have the ordinance of the person? It's there. It's just, we're beholden to the sheriff for enforcing. And no matter how many times we've asked them to, doesn't seem like the message is being heard.
I'll follow up. I believe your most recent citation ordinance approval gave the code enforcement the ability to do non-service animals. So if you can help me follow up. See what we can do.
Yeah, but most of these dogs are not service animals. First of all, a service animal doesn't bark at other people. And it doesn't go running around wild on the beach. I mean, it's obvious that they're not. I mean, I have no issue with someone with a service dog. I mean, I'd walk backwards to help them. But this other stuff, it's getting out of control.
I'm still waiting to see a dog at Home Depot go fetch Schedule 40 TBC for somebody, but I haven't seen that happen.
Give a timeline on ordinance 3, just the information.
At this time, I think the staff proposal is to start meeting with the beach stewardship committee and go through that. And we're two, which I think are more based on state technical standards that we find large and understand. And then first, the ordinance being largely items that have not received substantial comment over the last couple of years. I don't have a time frame, but it'll probably be after the August beach stewardship, maybe when we start that discussion.
For comments or questions? Now's the time.
Chairs, we're on the chairs.
That's in phase three.
Phase three. And there'll be a lot more opportunities to come, so we'll see probably many of you in August. Beach too.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you.